The first tropical cyclone of the hurricane season has developed as Tropical Depression 2, which likely will become Tropical Storm Arlene on the first day of the hurricane season. And taking a look at the current statistics with this tropical cyclone, we do see that the maximum sustained winds are at 35 miles per hour. Its central millibar pressure is around 1,007 millibars, so it is still relatively high, and it's moving west-northwest at a very slow pace at only 2 miles per hour, because like I've been saying in my previous videos, the steering currents over this storm system are very slow, but eventually we're going to see those steering currents build a little bit more to where we're going to see more of a northerly wind around the lower levels of the atmosphere for this storm to continue to move further southward. Here's a current look at the water vapor energy for Tropical Depression 2, and we do see that now it's beginning to enhance its convection around the center of circulation. Now, in my previous video, I did point out that if this storm were to develop into a tropical cyclone, it would need to be in that small area where the wind shear will be light enough for this storm to develop an enclosed and well-organized center of circulation to where a lot of heat energy will build, and that would create just enough convection for the pressure to lower enough along the surface for the winds to potentially enhance into tropical cyclone status. And we're seeing that right now, where we're seeing the convection mainly occur on the northeastern portion of the center of circulation, because like I've been saying in our previous videos, there's a very strong northwesterly upper level wind flow that's going on over this storm system, so that definitely is steering a lot of the thunderstorm activity towards the northeast, and we're seeing plenty of dry air associated with these strong upper level winds as well. So this storm is very lopsided, and the reason why it isn't considered a tropical storm yet is not only because the wind speed isn't at 40 miles per hour, it's also because the center of circulation isn't really enclosed enough with convection that would create a strong rotation around center of circulation. We're gonna need to really see an enclosed eye wall before we really begin this, before we can consider this tropical storm Arlene, but it is likely to develop at this point. It seems like there's going to be just enough convection and lift around the center of circulation for this storm to eventually develop into tropical storm Arlene, and so that's something to keep in mind along the West Florida coast. Taking a look at the current radar over the Gulf of Mexico and portions of the Caribbean, we do see that this tropical depression isn't necessarily bringing a large area of rainfall, as like I said, there's plenty of dry air that's pretty much swallowing up the nearly the entirety of this storm system. But we do have that small area around the center of circulation, or mainly to the northeast of the center of circulation, that's producing a high amount of thunder showers and heavy rainfall, but it's well off the coast of Florida and will likely stay off the coast of Florida for its time that it's going to be a tropical cyclone. It might steer back towards the coast of Florida, but by that point it likely won't be considered a tropical cyclone anymore. It'll just be considered a regular low pressure system. However, we do see some thunder showers moving through Florida just from the outer bands of this tropical depression, and that's expected to continue even as the storm will likely be hundreds of miles off the West Florida coast. So you definitely need to pay close attention to the possibility of heavy rain and potentially flash flooding in certain areas associated with some of these thunderstorms that this tropical depression or this potential tropical storm will produce as it continues ahead further southward. Now, taking a closer look at what the European model is stating at this time. So at this point, the European model expected the low pressure system to develop just off the West Florida coast, as we do see that right here, where this area of this low pressure is enclosed with a decent amount of moisture behind it, but we do see that there's plenty of dry air just to the southwest of this storm system. And moving forward with the forecast, the European model expects us to mainly maintain its strength and maybe strengthen a little bit as it moves further southward. The wind shear will be just light enough, at least for the time being, at least for the short-term future, for maybe this storm to be able to lower the pressure along the surface and develop a small heat engine to where the winds could strengthen, but it's going to be over a very short time period, a very short window, and this dry air will definitely inhibit it from really intensifying as fast as it could, because if it weren't for this dry air, we could be talking about a stronger tropical storm to maybe even a potential of a hurricane under the wind shear this light. However, that isn't the case, which is certainly good news. This will likely stay a weak tropical storm if it does develop into a tropical storm, which is likely at this point. But whether this develops into a tropical storm or not, the impacts should stay mainly the same along the coast of Florida. You should expect very heavy rainfall, potentially rough surf along the coast, and you definitely need to pay close attention to the potential gusty winds maybe up along the coast associated with this storm. Now, moving forward with the forecast, eventually the European model expects that not only the dry air to be too much as this storm moves southward, but the wind shear should increase as well as the storm continues to head further southward, and that will ultimately lead to its demise and eventually just dissipating into the southern Gulf of Mexico and potentially the Caribbean, and it might still bring some moisture right around Florida even if this storm does dissipate, but it'll no longer be considered a tropical storm. But you still need to pay close attention to rain showers in Florida even after this storm dissipates. But eventually the dry air should move into Florida by early next week, so conditions should mainly be good for the most part, but still watch out for heavy rain this weekend throughout the state of Florida. Taking a look at the forecasted wind shear map provided from the European model, we do see that this storm is located over an upper level trough where the upper level winds are relatively weak, which is the reason why this storm was able to develop even when it's surrounded by a decently strong amount of wind shear. It's in that small area where the wind shear is just light enough for just enough convection to develop and at least create a well organized enough center of circulation. But like I said, that window where the wind shear will be just light enough for this to develop an organized center of circulation will be very small, because eventually the storm will move southward and it isn't very far from experiencing very strong wind shear. Like I said before, we do see that the storm will eventually move further southward and the wind shear will only enhance as it does so, and we're going to see the upper level low that's bringing that strong wind shear towards Texas eventually move eastward and continue to inhibit this storm from developing anything more than, let's say, a weak tropical storm. And eventually this wind shear will be too much for this storm to handle, and it'll eventually dissipate right around the southern Caribbean, the southern Gulf of Mexico, or the northwestern portion of the Caribbean. At this point, although the steering currents are very weak surrounding this storm system, it is pretty certain at this point that we're going to see the storm move southward, since this ridge just to the north of it and this low that's expected to build just north of Bermuda is expected to create just enough of a strong northerly flow that would push this storm further southward into the Gulf of Mexico instead of going over the state of Florida, which was initially anticipated from the computer models just a couple days earlier. But now it seems like there's going to be just enough of a well-defined northerly flow that's going to steer the storm further southward, which is certainly good news, and it won't impact really any land, at least as a tropical cyclone. And moving forward with the forecast, we do see that a low develops right around the Bermuda area, and we do see that the ridging moves just enough southward into closer to the southern Midwest, to the point where it's going to create a northeasterly flow that's going to push this storm very slowly further southward, and that's exactly what we see right here. And we do have a small ridge over Mexico as well that's going to enhance the northerly flow that's going to push this storm further southward. So the trajectory forecast is very certain at this point. In terms of the amount of wind you should expect from this storm along the coast of Florida, for the most part, you won't really notice the winds associated with this tropical storm because it's going to be the strongest of the winds are going to be well off the coast. You might experience a few gusts here and there along the West Florida coast, but it won't necessarily be anything damaging. Maybe on the right around the Florida Panhandle coast, you could experience some gustier winds, as the strongest of the winds will be on the northern side where the upper level winds will be relatively weak. But outside of that, you shouldn't worry much about the gusty winds. Maybe bring those loose things inside just in case if you're right up along the coast, but this won't necessarily be a major wind threat, as the strongest of the winds should be well off the coast of Florida, which is certainly good news. But make sure, even though the winds will be relatively weak along the coast relative to a tropical storm, there still is that possibility of rip currents and rough surf. So make sure to take the right precautions. If you're advised not to swim in a beach, make sure to definitely not take the risk, because you definitely don't want to underestimate the intensity and the danger of a rip current. Here's what the spaghetti models are forecasting at this point, and we do see that pretty much all of them want to take this further southward, and some do bring a landfall towards Cuba, but most likely it'll weaken below tropical cyclone status by the time it reaches Cuba, as wind shear will be too much. And same goes for the coast of Florida, where some ensemble members do want to take us along the coast of Florida, but it likely won't be a tropical cyclone at this point, so it won't be much to worry about. So here's the National Hurricane Center's track forecast regarding potential Tropical Storm Arlene. So this is expected to develop into a tropical storm as early as tonight, and if it doesn't do it tonight, it'll likely do it on Friday, where the National Hurricane Center does expect this to strengthen just a little bit before it enters a highly sheared environment further southward and weakens back into a depression before completely dissipating as it approaches Cuba. But remember, the impact should impact areas well beyond the center of circulation. So Florida should still experience heavy rain from this, even though the eye wall of this storm will be hundreds of miles off the coast. The primary concern for Florida will be heavy rainfall, where we do see in southern Florida you should expect anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of additional rainfall, and some of these thunderstorms associated with this tropical depression could bring the possibility of flash flooding, so you want to be aware of that throughout southern Florida. Make sure if you see a body of water, don't turn around, don't drown, because typically that body of water is a lot deeper than you anticipate. So make sure to take the right precautions, especially if you live in a very vulnerable area when it comes to flooding. So this is my forecast when it comes to potential Tropical Storm Arlene. So this likely won't be a major event for the coast of Florida, as the center of circulation will be well off the coast, and even then the storm is going to be a very weak tropical storm. But you still need to watch out for that possibility of flooding rains in certain areas of Florida. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.